Hello everybody and welcome back. Thank you very much for joining me. My name is Deborah Hatswell and you're listening to BBR Investigations. I saw something between a man and a beast. The report I'm bringing you today centres on the Biddulph Valley, and that's where our witness Phil was born. And it is a beautiful place that feels like it's lost in time. The old ways still matter here. Trostone Hill's a good viewpoint to look out across the valley as far as the eye can see. Because of this, the hill would have been a very important early settlement site for us Brits. The views from there give you a vantage point all across the Cheshire Plain, the Welsh Mountains, Jodrell Bank, Manchester and the Wrecking. All of these areas have reports of dark, hairy canine creatures that seem to be over 7 feet tall, that can run standing up on 2 legs like a human and down on all 4s like an animal. Witnesses describe them as having the faces of that of a dog, a wolf, or a wild man. The area also has all of the things we find consistent in UK cryptid reports, i.e. reservoirs, rivers, country parks, nature reserves, burial sites old and new, and quarries. It's a land that sits above many pit tunnels, as the whole of Staffordshire area has been heavily mined. The River Trent, Narpersley Reservoir and the Serpentine are all water sources but steps away, and we shouldn't forget the cave systems in the area. The River Trent rises at Biddulph Moor before making its way via Narpersley Pool and Stoke-on-Trent to the east coast of England. Streams which flow down from the north and into the Biddulph Brook join the Dane and eventually arrive on the west coast. It's said that the rain running down the west side of Newpool Road will end up in the Irish Sea, while the gutters to the east deliver their water to the North Sea. It's an area where some families have lived for many generations, stretching back as far as time. In the northeast corner of the valley near the Cloud, you can see the remains of an ancient burial place, made around 4,500 years ago. The Vikings gave the name to the site, and they called it the Breitha, or Broadstones, and they dug up an ancient long barrow that they found there, hoping to find treasure. We now call this place Bridestones. The Anglo-Saxons settled in the valley around 650. There are several ancient holy wells and springs in the area also. Now, Biddulph is recorded in the Domesday Book, and some resources online will tell you that the name is derived from Anglo-Saxon, from by meaning beside or along, with dilf, which meant digging. This name may have some connection to the ancient quarrying in the area. But long before the Anglo-Saxons invaded our shores, it meant something very different. If we go back a few hundred years earlier to the Old English translation, it means bide, meaning to bide or to live, and ulf, meaning wolf. So Biddulph describes a dweller by or alongside the wolf, or loosely translated as he who runs beside the wolf. Now, the position of the area cannot be a coincidence. In all directions there are reports of cryptid creatures, and the proximity to Cannock Chase, Ellesmere Port and Delamere is not lost on me. We go to Crewe, Cheshire. They have a long history of werewolf and Dogman reports, and many of them have happened in present times. The Biddulph family are one of the original owners of the land, and their family crest shows a strange rampant beast who is wound in the shoulder. In Old English, this means it shows a canine creature that's been wounded with an arrow in its left shoulder flank. Or stranger still, vul means to bite on the chest. Now, the surname Biddulph has its origins in England, specifically in the country of Staffordshire, and the family held lands and properties in the area for centuries. The first written record of the family appears to be Thomas D. Biddulph in 1199. One of the local inns in the area is also called the Bleeding Wolf. Now, I've got to admit I'm intrigued with this case. Why does the family crest show a vulned beast? And what's the connection to the Biddulph family and the strange rampant beast displayed on their heraldic crest? Their family motto also flares a match, as it is Sublimora Patamus. And my basic knowledge of Latin tells me it means loosely, let we seek the higher things. Now, the case we're discussing today features the accounts of one family who have also lived in the area for generations. They don't hold a seat there. They're like myself, they're working class, connected to the land, attached to the old ways and the rhythms of nature. Like most of these experiences, the events were never shared until one New Year's Eve party, when our witness had a conversation with one of his older relatives, who told him some of the older generation's strange experiences that happened when they were growing up there. His ancestors have lived, farmed, mined, and worked that land for generations, going back in time. He knows the rhythm of the place. He knew it before he could even walk. He knows the habits of the creatures there, how they move around the area, when they mate or spawn. He ate from the woodlands, hedgerows, fields, and waterways his entire life. He knows every inch of the area, all the shortcuts, all the hiding spots, and how to move around out there unseen if needed. He played there as a child, lived there as an adult, and came together with his family members there often. It's his heritage that he loves and holds dear. He's entitled to that land and its properties just as much as the landed gentry, because without his family, the wealthy would not eat or stay warm. A Ponzi title does not account for anything at the end of the day. His great-grandfather sold goods from his carts, just like mine. Mine collected scrap metal in exchange for donkey stones or a dolly blue to keep you white, sparkling white. I'd sit on that cart every day I could. I loved going on rounds with my granddad. Our lady, the cart horse, plodded along those Salford cobble streets, usually with several of his grandkids on board. And Phil feels the same, and he would ride on the horse and cart as I did as a child. And for all being brought up in nature is a blessing, it can also be a curse. It's really hard to explain to country folk that you've seen something between man and beast. You're liable to be a laughingstock for generations to come. You can't share your experience with a bear-like creature in your local pub or at the cattle market. So our witness kept his boyhood terrors to himself, even after a New Year's Eve party, when one family member shared their story with him. Phil realised all along he was not the only male relative to have their own unexplained experiences on that land that had never been shared with him before. What you'll hear now is me reading a transcribed call that took place between myself and the witness as he explains his connection to the area and what has happened to him and his family members over the years. Phil said, "The first experience I'd like to share with you, Deb, took place in 1980. I remember it was a few days after the autumn equinox, and there was a full harvest moon out that night, and I was in a place called Narpersley Pool, close to River Trent. Now it's called Greenway Country Park, and there are two routes that take you to the pool or the Serpentine. I fished there my entire life, always outdoors day and night. My grandparents lived there, and I lived between there and the village where my parents lived. Mum and Dad worked long hours, and school was closer to the cottage, so I stayed at the cottage all week, spent time with my parents on weekdays and holidays. It was the best of both worlds. I'd never had any problems down there, but I have to admit that the Serpentine was always giving me a weird feeling. There's just something off about it. Nothing that you couldn't cope with, but I describe it as atmospheric. There's a bridge on the big pool where the Warden's Tower is, and I'm standing there watching the harvest moon. It was huge, absolutely beautiful, and I just stood there on the bridge watching it. I had a dog with me at the time, belonged to my grandparents, and he was a guard dog. He was trained to attack. One night, two bigger lads tried taking some cigarettes from me, and I just dropped his lead, and he made short work of both of them. He was a fantastic dog. Even people who had known him since he was a pup thought so. My granddad had a friend who the family knew for years, and he'd come down every Saturday and watch the horse racing with Grandad. And one day he was down at the Serpentine for a spot of fishing, and I was walking around, I had the dog with me. Old chap gives me a cup of tea, cheese sandwich, bacon sandwich, and without thinking, he tapped me on the shoulder to give me a cigarette, and the dog grabbed his hand, pulled him off his box, and he went straight into the water. He said the dog needed to be put down, but he was just doing his job, protecting me. I used to walk with him all the time. There's no doubt at some point when you were out at night, you'd come across some yobs from the other villages looking for trouble. And he saw 3 or 4 of them off in his time. On the night I wanted to tell you about, I'd walked down from the bridge and there were 2 young kids fishing. They'd caught something, but they couldn't land it. So I helped them with that. I dispatched it and I gutted it and taught them how to do it in future for themselves, as they wanted to take it home for eating. I rolled a cigarette and I set off again on my walk. There's a part just before the Serpentine where you come to a sharp left-hand turn, and on the walk, it's then flanked by rhododendron bushes along both sides of the path, all the way up into the woods. The council had put in a white limestone footpath, and just around the bend there was a small bench, and there was a holly bush just at that bend that came out into the path, kind of obstructed your view a little. I could see white circles of light on the floor where the moonlight was coming through the trees, and it illuminated the white path. As I say, I took 3 or 4 more paces and the dog suddenly stopped, and I felt him start to tremble at the side of my leg, and he sort of bounced a few times on his front feet. I couldn't see anyone in front of us anywhere, and there was nobody there. I told him to come on, and we walked 2 or 3 more paces, and a brick hit me on the side of my right leg, just below my knee. And at this, the dog reared up, starts barking. I'm trying to hold his collar as he's going berserk, but he was whimpering at the same time as barking, and I've never heard him do this before. But as far as I could see, there was nobody there, and I didn't know what was upsetting him so much. The reason I was there that night was doing a job for a local farmer, setting some traps for vermin control. I didn't want to leave them out all night alone, as some people did walk their dogs through there, and it felt better if I stayed where I could see the traps. I had a small axe on me, but it was only for tapping in some stakes or for cutting back, brush, etc. The family axe being passed down, it was really sharp. One of my great-grandfathers had honed the stave and reduced the head weight by half. It was perfect for setting traps and protection if I ever needed it. I just put it in the back of my jeans with my jacket over the top. Other than that, I just had the dog lead with me and a heavy metal collar. My night vision is good, even now. And back then, it was as sharp as a tack. So I should have been able to see the movement of anyone out there. I thought it was someone up to no good, hiding in the woods. And at this point, the dog's backing up and away from where he's looking. I took a few more paces, and the dog spun around to look in the area he'd just come from. And I couldn't see anything. It was completely black. I couldn't see the trees, the bushes, or the white path. It was pitch black, and you couldn't see into it, as if someone had dropped a sackcloth in front of my face. It really unnerved me, and I thought, what the fuck's going on? I turned for home, and as I did, I heard something skid on the path behind me in the blackness. I was having none of it, so I looked around and I couldn't see anyone. I unleashed the dog, got his lead and the heavy chain in one hand and a small axe in the other. Hearing that skid and the weight in it, I thought it was going to be a huge fella or a couple of them. And as I let the dog off to help, he spins around and bolts for home. This is not how he would normally behave, and that scared me even more. He left me standing there, alone in the darkness. So I grabbed and I spun the lead in the direction of the darkness, and I hit nothing. The chain just hit my leg. I just started backing up, looking the way I'd come and hoping I could make it back into one of the patches of light by the moon. I thought to myself, if I did a few backward paces and then just suddenly spin and run, I would catch them out and I could make it into the light. And as I spun, I heard thud. It was a big, heavy thud, as though someone had launched themselves down from a tree. I absolutely shit myself. It had to be a really big fella to make that kind of thud. You could feel it as he dropped down and landed. At the side of one of the trees, there was a holly tree that came out into the path. So I reasoned this was the reason I couldn't see anybody. I got to the middle of the light, and from the direction the brick had been thrown, from something there just took off through the bushes and the rhododendrons. Whatever it was really big. I could see the bushes parting, and it was moving at a 45-degree angle. And that was the direction that I had to go. You have to go over a stile, which brings you into the spinner, and there you're up in the meadows. I've no choice but to go that way, and I thought to myself, this fucker's heading me off. Simultaneously, the holly bush started to shake violently. It wasn't a small holly, it was pretty robust, and that scared me even more, as there had to be 2 of them. I decided to just front whoever it was in that bush, because I'd had enough at this point. I said, look fella, you're in for a clobbering. If you come any closer, I'll put this axe over your head. And I showed the axe, and I finished by saying, this'll kill anything, man or beast. At that time, I'm also worried about the dog. I'm worried there might be a courting couple who'd come across him, and I don't know what the dog would do in that state if he ran into them. I was frightened for anyone who met the dog on the path, and I was shitting myself with the two fellas I thought were in front and behind me. At the time, I was as fit as a butcher's dog, and I did more running than Forrest Gump. So I just took off for the next patch of light as fast as I could. I'd turn around and see if anything made it into the patch of light I'd just left. Then I'd set off again. I did this 3 times, if I remember, and I kept going. I got to the spinner, ran through there all the time, waiting to see this thing that ran, that way. I ran to the field, and I could see the dog on its side, panting and puffing and frothing at the mouth. I calmed him down, and I clipped him back onto his lead, and I edged our way across the field. There are about 30 Stoke fields, and for anyone who doesn't know what that is, it's cattle, heifers, steers, bullocks, etc. Now, normally, when we'd be in that field, I'd unclip him. So, because they'd come for him and he could get away off your lead, they don't like dogs, and they'll attack as a herd if threatened. But this night was different. I kept him on the lead, and he was pulling like a train to get out of there. And when I looked at the Stoke as we headed to the stile, they were all in a circle together, in the bottom left-hand corner of the field. We made it to the stile, and the hair on the back of my neck was standing up. I lit a fag and was getting myself together as my arms were bristling, and I felt physically sick with fear and adrenaline. I took a few steps with the dog, and I thought, I'm not having this. And I went to go back, and the dog put the brakes on, and he would not move. He just barked and snapped at me. He didn't connect, but it was a warning, and he'd never done that before. There are 2 directions you can go from the stile. One takes you down to Dead Man's Pool, and the other is the way that I needed to go. So we kept going, and there's a set of woods there, and as I passed, I saw something drop out of a tree. I thought it was that knob who'd thrown a brick at me. I could see he were a big fella. I got ready, and he dropped down onto all 4s and took off like a rocket, like shit out of a goose. The moon was clear, and I could see him moving across that field at speed. It was boltish, headed towards Millhouse Road, which was the way I had to go. The gait on this thing as it moved was bear-like. It stayed down on all 4s the whole time after dropping from that tree. No human can run like that down on all 4s, moving like a bear. It moved up that field, and I just had no choice but to walk home in another direction, hoping it had gone when I got there. I got home, put the dog away, just thought about it all night. I hardly slept, and the next day I got up, and the dog would not come for a walk with me. I've walked all my life out there, and I've never seen anything like that bear thing. I've fished the Serpentine day and night, and for all it feels off, I've never been scared to be there, and neither had the dog. But there was one time when I was night fishing, and I saw a light on the opposite bank, which is where I'd had the bear experience. It looked like an old hurricane lamp that someone had on a bike, as it stayed at the same height all the way around. If it was being carried, the light would bounce up and down, as they moved along inside the woods. This kept a steady height and glided quicker than someone walking or running would. I never really thought anything about that. I didn't know if it was connected. But many years later, someone told me the same story about that light. I've tried looking into all this, Deb, and where does it start and where does it stop? There are so many junctions you can take, and it's overwhelming. I just know what I saw and how my dog reacted. He didn't try and reason this away. He was more scared than I'd ever seen him, and he acted completely out of character. It's played on my mind for decades now, and that night it was replaying in a loop in my head. So the next day I went back. I traced my steps. I looked everywhere I could to see. No signs of any disturbance. There were no tracks of anything out there. I've been tracking animals my entire life, and I should have picked up on something. I went over to that large holly tree, hoping that was what blocked out the light, but I could see up through the canopy and the sky was visible. There was no explanation for why that path went completely dark like that. I went home, had my tea, and after I finished, I got the folding saw, and I went back and cut that holly tree down. It was part anger and fear, really. My reasoning was that holly tree was never going to do that to me again. After that, I didn't visit that particular place for about 5 years. I still go out at night, but never to that part of the land. And when I finally did, I wished afterwards that I hadn't. The second time I went back, I was with two friends of mine. Both have sadly passed away now. We were lamping up near the old manor house. There was a family home and a beginning of a walled garden there, long time ago now. A huge yew trees that make a tunnel that you walk through along the path. Had an old cast iron fencing around it. And when the last owner died, his next of kin lived in Australia, and he gifted it to the local council, and they demolished the hall. Now it's a picnic area and a place for people to visit with their families or, walk the dog. That night, we'd walked from my house in the village with my two friends, and we were out looking for rabbits. We bagged a couple, and we were walking up towards the grange when the heavens opened from nowhere, and it started pouring down. There was no thunder or anything, just a sudden downpour. By the time we'd run into the country park, it was raining so heavily we were soaked to the underpants. So we ran through there as fast as we could, got to the yew tree, and it was like standing underneath an umbrella. As we were standing there, I decided to have a smoke. I had a packet of Swarm Vesta with me, and as you know, when you strike a match, it flares. I cut my hand as there was a bit of wind, and as I struck it and I brought it to my face, my friend said, "Run," and he was looking past me. I looked at his face, then looked in the direction he was looking, and I saw something in the matchlight. In that light, I could see a hairy bloke, standing as little as 3 feet behind me. There was no noise of him arriving, and I don't know how he got so close to us without anyone noticing. I don't know how long he was there before we arrived. My mate looked terrified. We stepped back a bit, and I shone the torch at him, and he was gone. We checked the fence and everything, but there was no signs of anyone. We had torches with us as we were lamping, but there was no one around. He wasn't a gamekeeper or a landowner or anything. He was about 7 foot tall, had long hair everywhere, long scruffy beard. I don't remember any signs of clothing or material. I'm 5 foot 10ish, and I had to scrape my neck back to see his face. We just left, didn't really talk about it again. As I said, the Serpers always felt off to me, but everything else seemed fine. But that changed many years later at a family party. I thought, other than my friends, I was the only person to see or experiencing anything odd in that place. On New Year's Eve 1999, the family had a party, and they were all invited, so lots of my family members I hadn't seen for a while were there. My father was born where these experiences happened, and his dad passed away at a very early age. His father, my great-grandfather, sold the farm and rented a home at the side of a set of woods for my grandmother and the children. That's to the south of Narpersley, Pools and the mill pond. Times were really hard back then, and there was no benefit system. So my great-grandfather had to go back down the pit to provide for them all. He saw to the boys, and my dad's mother saw to the girls. That's how things were done back then, to keep the family together. During the party in '99, I went off for a walk to clear my head. And when I came back, I realised my dad had gone missing. He was in a room on his own, sitting there with a drink in his hand. I asked him if he was okay, and he said he was fine, but his breathing was tight. He asked me where I'd been, and I told him I'd been down near Pools, and he looked at me and asked, "Don't you ever get scared down there?" And I lied and said, "No." And he asked why, and then he told me this story. When they moved to the new house, my dad and his brothers had to help around the place and bring in food, so they'd often be out fishing, trapping, hunting or foraging, as most folk who live out of town do. So I'm sitting there listening to my dad, holding my secret inside, and he told me that one night, Dad had set up to hunt some roosting birds with his younger brother. Dad had a single 12 bore, and his brother had a double 410. They put themselves crouched down on the path and were hidden in the foliage in the hopes of bagging a bird or two. Even a rabbit or a hare would do for the pot. It was a bit of a bust, as the wind was really cold that night, and Dad said it was the kind of wind that cut through you. My dad's little brother had on his granddad's great army coat over his shoulders like a cape to keep the wind out. He said, "Now it's coming out in this wind. Let's get another 5 minutes, call it a night." As my dad went to agree, my uncle let out a scream. The holly bush that I cut down all those years later started to shake violently, like it had with me. The greatcoat had been grabbed from his shoulders and yanked away from him. Without thinking, they both fired in fright, aiming at the holly bush. My dad's brother fired 2 times, and my dad just once, but the bush just kept shaking, so they ran. They legged it home and flew in the door, telling their granddad what had happened, and he went ballistic at them. He grabbed the guns and a light and went back to where they were. The greatcoat was there on the floor, but nothing else. There were no growls or anything like my experience, but the bush shaking was the same. My great-granddad found nothing down there. I was blown away that this had happened to my dad, in the same place I saw something myself decades later. When he told me about it, I knew it was exactly the same horry tree that I'd cut down. I could see even after all these years it still had an effect on him. It triggered another memory for me, from a night when I was fishing down there with my dad. It happened about 5 years before my own experience, but I hadn't put it together until that night of the party. We were down there at the pools. It's only a mile or 2 away from our home. And as we got set up, he realised we'd forgotten the flask and the butty box. So I said I'd run back for it, and he said, no, leave it, it's fine. But me being me, I insisted and set off, and he got up and came after me and stopped me heading home. He kept saying, we can do without it, we don't need them. But I was insistent, and he said, okay, but stay away from Morgan's Hollow. Morgan's Hollow was a place I'd been before, but it was devoid of birds, so we never spent much time there, as it was eerie. You never heard critters or bird songs in there. We never spoke about it again. And I never told my dad what happened to me. And I can't now, because he's passed on. Talking with you, Deb, has brought back so many memories of strange things that have happened to me down there. And you asked about the holly bush, and if I'd had any other experiences near it. And I didn't. But I did have an experience with a different holly bush. There was a farmer down there, and if he caught you on his land, he would give you a right pasting, or even worse, as a couple of times he shot at us. So if I were heading his way, I'd go before 4 a.m. when he'd get up for milking, because if he caught you down there, there'd be hell to pay. One morning the fog had dropped, and everything just greyed out. It was like walking on the moon out in those fields, and as I passed a holly bush, something growled at me, and it wasn't a dog. The closest thing I can think of is when a huge bull starts to bellow and you can feel it in your rib cage. And I've had the odd run-in with a bull, but nothing like this. I just backed away and it backed off. So I don't know what it was. There's one other reason I never speak about any of this, and it happened one morning. I was out with my binoculars one day. There's one of the farmers close to Rushton that started losing lambs down there. It started with missing afterbirth, but then the lambs were coming up missing, so he thought it was a fox, and he wanted me to sort it for him. I settled in a bit of wood, and I was looking at a downed tree, and I saw a lynx laying across it. It was as clear as day. I'd no doubt what I were looking at. I'd no gun with me, no dog with me, so I sat and I just looked at it. The wind was in my direction. I had the advantage, so I cut the distance between us a little bit. But as soon as I picked up my binoculars, it turned its face square on and stared at me. It stretched, walked off, and I never saw it again. I made the mistake of telling people about that lynx. No one ever believed me, but I know what I saw that day. So, Deb, this is the first time I've shared this with anyone, and I've shared more than I meant to, but you made it easy for me. Take care. Look after yourself. Phil. I cannot thank Phil enough for sharing his family's experiences with me. Not only for being brave enough to let me share them, along with lots of information on the area and the Biddulph family that he provided me with, it also made it much easier for me to dig a little deeper and unearth a few things, read the heraldic shield and the motto. But I'd also like to thank him for taking me back to so many memories I'd forgotten from my childhood. Growing up on the edge of the countryside gave me the opportunity to really connect with nature as a child. If we weren't exploring some woodland, beach or mountainside, we'd be fishing or watching the wildlife. My dad needed nature, he craved it. It calmed him, as it did my grandfather Jed on my mum's side. We grew up with lots of animals. There's a story in the family where my mum panicked when we were watching tadpoles. I was about 18 months old. Mum said without warning, I shot my hand into the water, grabbed 3, promptly ate them. My mum was panicking and my granddad was laughing his head off when she ran up the cobble street to take me to the doctors. He said, it's only protein, she'll be fine. We had a huge pig that always wandered collecting treats from people on his daily commute. And we'd have to tie him to a 56-pound weight to stop him wandering off around the streets, crossing roads and causing mayhem. My granddad would ride his buggy or his landau everywhere. Everywhere he went before he bought a car. Usually with the shotgun in tow. Those were the days. We had a huge beige Palomino stallion named Star that my Uncle Mark had ride without me nan knowing. And if we were out with Jed, he was only a small boy. One day I was on Lady, the cart horse, with my cousins bareback, probably about 5 I was then, so our Mark could be about 8. He's on Star, and he took off across the bombing crofts after smelling a mare. Star was saddled, Mark's foot got stuck in the stirrup, and it dragged him for miles and miles. He was scraped to ribbons when we got to him. My nan nearly killed my granddad that day for letting him ride him. I was picked on a bit at school because I wasn't as cityfied as most of the folks in my school. I just thought their parents were tight, as we'd say, for keeping them in town all the time. Now I long for those days, and I'm lucky that I've reconnected with nature. Like Phil, it took me a long time to go back to the area where I had my experience. I understand Phil. He reminds me of my uncles. He walks the land when the animals are out hunting. He knows what birds nest where the best fishing spots are, and he can spot a discrepancy in his surroundings quickly. He knows his wild foods and the sounds of all the animals, large and small. So when he tells me he's hearing a roar or a growl he can't identify, I'd be a fool not to take note. There are smells associated with humans, smells we don't even realise we carry. From the petrol we pump, the coffee we drink, and the many soaps, deodorants, scents, beauty and laundry products we use every day. All critters can smell that coming from miles away. My mum used to rib me dad about his outdoor wear because it was stinker, but he said it blended him into the environment. It worked because he ended up being one of the best fishermen in the Northwest, and he was really chuffed when he appeared in the Angling Times a few times. When my Mark was young, he made what they called his shit igloo, but if you ask him what it was, he'd call it his manure blind and tell you proudly, nothing can smell me in there. Many years ago, I realised many of the Welsh tribes also do the same thing. But this gives you a good example of the lengths some folk will go just to be in the best spot to watch the deer roam or spot birds, rabbits and hares. My Mark can watch a kestrel work the fields and embankments for hours on end. You should see him when the buzzards are out, he don't come in. He can literally call the crows and they will go around our house cawing. Small birds actually land on him, and everywhere we go we have wild bird, seed, and suet in the car. I don't know what Phil saw that night as it ran over the fields bear-like, or what stalked him from those holly bushes and growled at him. He mentions some particular plants and trees, though, that do have a habit of popping up in areas of cryptid reports. The first one being rhododendrons. As Phil explained, they ran both sides of that white line path he was walking on, and they show up in most of the areas where people see cryptid creatures. They also make amazing blinds. You can see out of them, but not in. And it's usually a few degrees warmer inside there. And they shed the rain while it keeps you dry. Ideal for sealing yourself till humans have passed by. I once got into one at the side of a supermarket when it was snowing to prove this point in my brightest coloured clothes I could find. And not one person saw me. And even dogs sniffing the bush didn't react to me being in there. I did it because that's the environment I was in when I saw the man-ape. They also have a significance for providing hallucinogenic honey and are used for transmogrification all across the globe. Shamans and holy men have used them for centuries in their rituals, and they help them to reach a higher spiritual realm. And they regard it as, it brings about the process of changing and being changed completely into another being. The holly is a similar plant. It's usually planted next to houses as it's a very good natural lightning conductor and also as a protector from bad energy and dark spirits. It's not known to shake in any way and it's pretty wind resistant. Whatever shook that tree had to be big and it wasn't bothered by the holly spines that run all along its leaves. And then we have the line of yew trees. the 3 lads sheltered in that night when the heavens opened, and taking shelter there brought them into contact with the wild hairy man standing just behind them. The yew tree is said to have qualities of longevity and regeneration, and it said slips of yew, cut at the eclipse of the moon, were thought to convey powers of healing, and it's also thought to bring about immortality. On most of Phil's experiences, he's been relaxed in areas he can let his guard down in, and he feels at home there. He was smoking, walking with the dog beneath a harvest moon when he had the encounter with the bear-like creature, or walking the fields and woods with his other events. He walks softly, so he doesn't scare whatever he's looking for. When his father and uncle had their experience, they were hunkered down, sitting silently, so as not to spook anything. I think they all were hunting when these things were also hunting. Phil's family links into all of this. He knows the land like the back of his hand, as did his family members before him. And he's not the only witness from the area. There are several other reports that encircle Biddulph, and the witnesses in these cases describe the same kind of creature. So to the north, there is a tale of the Astbury Bigfoot that was spotted in 2016. And the witness in that case said, "I think I encountered a Bigfoot last summer. I was walking on top of a hill near the golf course, and I spotted a dark, hairy figure move across the side of the hill. It moved through the long grass on the hillside and disappeared quickly. It wasn't a cat or a dog or a badger. It happened during the afternoon, and it was warm and sunny. There was no one else around. I've also heard strange grunting sounds coming from trees and bushes nearby. I walked away and haven't been to the area since. I can't give you much info because I only saw it for about a matter of seconds. It disappeared almost as soon as I saw it. It was like a ninja moving through that long grass. It wasn't very big though, as it seemed to be crouching down as it moved. It looked to be about the same size of a human, and its fur was black. It moved very fluently. I thought it was a monkey when I saw it, and it just vanished. I stood and waited for it to reappear, as I thought it was just an escaped zoo animal or something. I saw it next to the Astbury golf course. Now, to the west of this area, there's a very strange report that is incredibly similar to Phil's, not only in description, but in the circumstances of the event, down to the way the creature moved across the field, heading for the mineshaft. And this happened in Mocop Castle in Staffordshire, and that case was investigated in the Phantom and Monsters blog. A witness from the village of Harris Seahead, Staffordshire, described his encounter with an unknown creature that he believes was the cryptid canine whilst he was out at night hunting rabbits. He had a pellet gun, which had a night scope attachment on it, and he mentioned that he found it weird that he could not see one single rabbit around at the time. It was a good clear night, and he'd expected to have seen a few of them in the area. He assumed this then meant there must have been a fox around, so using his scope, he scouted the area around him. As he looked past a hedgerow, he saw what he described as a pair of red eyes looking back at him. He'd lowered his scope for a second, just to make sure it wasn't his eyes playing tricks, and then he looked straight back through them again. And he became aware at this point that there was something there, something that stood upright at the hedge with its head just above it, looking right back at him, and it looked like a man. He did notice a canine-like snout on the creature. He kept looking at it, wondering what this creature was. Then he witnessed this thing, whatever it was, drop and go down onto all fours, knowing now that originally this thing was standing on its hind legs. He saw the creature run off on all fours across the field at a steady pace towards an old mine. He said this was no regular dog, horse or cow. In fact, he had no idea what it was. The witness's 2 adult daughters confirmed to Lon that the man came home much earlier than he intended. He was really shook up and he was scared. He said that he wasn't going to stay down there, especially when, all he had was a pellet gun. To this day, he hasn't been back to the location since, and he won't go out shooting alone at night anymore. This experience has really scared him to the core and changed his entire life. And to the south, we have, I don't know if it was human, an animal or a dog. And this happened on the road from Smallthorne to Burlham. And the witness in this case is called Andy Gillis. And he said, I had a strange encounter back in 2003 on the road that runs from Burslem to Smallthorne Road. It was late on a Wednesday night. Me and my pal had just been to the Odeon in Hanley to see SWAT on the Orange Wednesday deal. Anyway, on the way home, just before dropping my mate off in my Saxo VTR, I saw something really strange. There's a very tall hunch person, or an animal dog-like thing, or something. I still don't know what it was. It jumped the width of the road in one leap, and it scaled a high wall like it was a simple curb drop. The speed and power of this thing was epic. It was like Eddie Hall crossed with Usain Bolt and Michael Jordan, but it had long hair all over it, and it looked like a large dog, moving on two legs, or it was a man in a very good costume. It's crazy, and I still wonder what we both saw that night. We both did not drink or ever do drugs. It's totally unexplained crazy stuff, so we never spoke about it again, as our other mate thought we were both nuts, but we know what we saw that night. And then to the east, there's a report which is very different altogether, and that's the case of the mermaid of Blakemere Pool, Staffordshire. Now, that's hidden away on a part of the land in the UK that is completely landlocked. So what's a mermaid doing in Staffordshire, in a landlocked country in England? You know, there are other legends of pools with mermaids inhabiting them in the Peak District and other parts of England, also miles distant from the tree. Some are said to be linked to the sea by a tunnel, which the mermaid traverses at certain times of the year, such as Easter. Blakemere Pool has two very different explanations concerning the origin of its mermaid. There are tales like this in the countryside, and we do have legends and myth and lore. But don't mix up countrified for being stupid. People who live in the country are used to the things that go on around them. A certain bird call or an owl call wouldn't scare them. It's something that they're used to hearing. The sound a female fox makes can be absolutely terrifying if you've never heard it before. Cows, bullocks, sheep, the whole 9 yards will make noise that you do not expect them to make. So when people from the countryside come forward to me, I take their reports seriously than somebody who's arrived from the town and never been out there for more than 10 minutes, if you get what I mean. We have a lot of tourists come up here and they're astounded by everything that they see, but it's all normal stuff that just goes on, without you even noticing. What really interested me in this case is the central location of Biddulph and the way that the reports go out around it, as they do at Winter Hill and Cannock Chase. We just pop over to Crewe. There's a report from a guy who got the movers in because he was moving house. And he told the chap moving the van that he was moving because there was a werewolf that watched him from the wood every night. Sharing these stories, sharing these encounters, as Phil said to me, stops them becoming obsolete. He had an experience that he never shared to his family members. And even knowing that his dad had an experience with something strange down there didn't make it any easier for him to share. And I understand that completely. It's impossible to find anywhere that you can share a report like this freely, without ridicule. And even if you share it in encrypted circles, some people will still dismiss and ridicule. And then we have why didn't you take a photograph? Why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do that? You've got to put yourself in the shoes of that witness. Nobody goes out at night expecting anything like this to happen. When Phil was going out, he was doing a job for a farmer, but he's around at the time when other animals are hunting. And even if we just look at British wildlife, what we expect to be here, dawn and dusk is a time when animals are active, Sit outside one night and watch the rabbits come out, or the bats, as I do, and you'd be absolutely amazed how much protein is moving around out there. Tie that into the fish and anything that comes from the fresh water, the woodland food, your hedgerow foods, everything. There's so many food sources out there. It's unbelievable. I've fished this area with my dad a few times, absolutely a few times. And it's just fields and farms and an amazing place to be. And growing up, as I said, for me, I was looked down on a little bit because, we were always out in the countryside somewhere doing something. We weren't dead modern like all the other kids on our estate. But all the kids on our estate never went anywhere, other than the free holiday they got for 7 days from school every year. That was it, and it wasn't like that for me. We were everywhere. My dad threw us in that van or in that car the minute he finished work, and he'd drive off and we'd just go wherever he felt like going. One of his favourite places in Staffordshire was Shifnal. He said it had the best pie shop in the world. But yeah, so talking with Phil has brought up some amazing memories for me. But it's only put me in that position where I've sat down and looked at my report again and just thought, how many times have people asked me when I was a kid what I actually saw? And they expected me to have the answers to all of that, as the way we expect Phil to have the answers to what he saw. And life just isn't like that, unfortunately. You don't know what the creature was that you saw. He said it could drop down from the tree. There was clearly more than two of them, unless it was throwing sound of some kind. One went out in front of him, the other was behind him. Now that is a tactical move. He couldn't see it, and everything around him went dark. And that's the worrying thing, because there's nothing in nature that can block out your view like that. I don't know if he was in a position like that night where he walked into a hunting party, or that he just walked that path and they were frightened by him. We don't know, do we? We have no idea what's going on there with any of it. But moving forward, what we can do is collect these reports, put them together so we can see what's happening around the area. And hopefully that will give us some answers in the future. There will be further witnesses to come. You don't get an active area like this that sits between Cannock Chase and Winter Ale and no reports are going to come in for the rest of millennia. It's not going to be like that. Some of those reports will be old and some of them will be future. And all we can do is offer a place to sit down and discuss them with people like Phil and, the others. Steve Heavycon's had some experiences in the area. And he saw what he described as two definite canine creatures crouched in the same position in a field when he was coming from the cemetery. And we all know that these animals are seen around ancient sites, ancient burial mounds, and modern cemeteries, and this hasn't changed. I noticed that it said that the Vikings had dug up the old burial mound there. Well, that will have caused a great deal of disturbance. Any new homes that have been built in the area will unearth all of that from the soil. So we have something going back as far as time, all the way through to 2024. I hope that I will continue to bring you reports like this, week in, week out, as we go forward. I once said a very long time ago, I'll do this until I've run out of reports. And whenever I run out of reports, I can hang my hat up and retire. Well, my hat's still on my head and my boots are still on my feet because these reports don't stop coming in at all. And these are just the ones that we know of. We don't know how many others are out there in families that have been shared or not shared with the rest of the family members or friends. But if they do come up, I guarantee you that I'll bring them to you and we'll discuss them and hear them as we have done with Phil. I want to thank Phil for coming forward. He's been incredibly brave. And I know that doing that will bring others forward. And that's the thing that matters. He shared it. He's told you his truth. He can take off that overcoat now and walk forward, knowing that what he saw that night is undescribable. And that's it. No more, no less. It's undescribable. And none of us know what it was. So good luck to you, Phil. I'll be sitting down again with Phil this week and we'll go over a few things. And I'll ask him about other experiences he may have had as a small child. And I think we'll find that all of this will probably tie in to him, his ancestors, and the way they've walked that land for millennia. So until next time, good night, everyone.